Greetings and welcome to another tutorial on the smart grid layout. In this tutorial I'm going to cover a new field tag that has been introduced in version 4.11 of the plugin. To demonstrate this, I'm just going to start a new form, and the new field is called dynamic checkboxes. Let me just clear this field, this form, and just clear the HTML source, come back to the beginning, and now we have a default single column, single row form. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a dynamic checkbox. So you may have seen the previous tutorial on dynamic dropdown, and you may have used these in some of your forms. So the dynamic checkbox is a similar concept to the dynamic dropdown, and basically what it enables is to display or to build dynamically a list of checkboxes to be displayed on your form. So you will recognize that the source of this dynamic field is similar to what the dynamic dropdown has, which is basically you can either source it from a taxonomy, a post, or having a custom filter. This is all similar to what is introduced in the dynamic dropdown, but in this case we have a dynamic checkbox which has different type of styles that can be used. By default we use the hybrid dropdown, and I'm linking a separate video on the hybrid dropdown, and there's a link here which takes you to the hybrid dropdown documentation page. And basically this is an HTML and CSS drop-down field that basically displays a list of checkboxes as a drop-down menu, rather than having one huge list of checkboxes which takes up a lot of space within your form. In addition to this, you can limit the selections. By default it's a single selection, but you can actually set this to a fixed number, or you can select to be unlimited, and this would be similar to having a multi-select field, drop-down field. And once you've actually selected a source such as post categories, you notice that you can actually include branches. And the reason this is possible rather compared to, say, the drop-down, the dynamic drop-down, is the fact that because we're not limited by the select fields ability to only nest one set of groups of options, with the checkbox drop-down you can actually nest as many groups as you want, nested one into the other. And this is perfect for hierarchical taxonomies where you want to actually indicate and display the branch structure. So here for this example I'm going to include the branches. I'm going to insert this into my field. Let me put also maybe a submit button for you to realize how this is being displayed. Okay, and let's publish this. Now let's verify our form on the front end. And here we have our drop-down list, which shows the list of checkbox fields for the category hierarchical taxonomy, and you can see that the branches of the taxonomy are shown, nested one into the other, as we would expect. And selecting these would then basically build the field selection. And because we've actually we've limited our field to only 3 selection options, trying to select multiple ones beyond 3 just simply ignores the requests. We'd need to deselect one of these values in order to be able to actually select another one. The display here is something which is set by the hybrid drop down field automatically, but this is something that can be customized. And if you look at the hybrid HTML documentation site, you can see how this can be customized according to your preference. Now, in addition to the default hybrid drop-down fields, a dynamic checkbox can have other styles, and one of these is the TreeView option, drop-down option. And basically the TreeView is a particular way of handling multiple selections. Let me build exactly the same example we had previously. And what the TreeView does is that it actually partially selects parent values of a given selection. So for nested values, nested cells, the TreeView is then able to basically indicate that a given selection has a parent and reflects the branch that has been selected rather than an individual value. So obviously this is useful for instances where you want to be able to select an entire branch. You want to indicate an entire branch that the user has selected, and the value that is being returned by the this checkbox. If you inspect the checkbox value here in the HTML, you'll see that the value is actually set to the top level parent, all facilities, which is reflected here, and then subsequently to house facilities, which is the second level in the branch, and finally the baby bed, which is the actual term we selected. So the value that is being returned to the server when the form is submitted will actually reflect the entire branch that has been selected by a given user. And this can be useful in certain cases where you want to build this kind of structure. And moving on, there is one more possibility of building an interesting way of building checkboxes, and that is that the hybrid drop-down has the ability to also build custom option labels where the JSON object, so a hybrid drop-down actually is initialized using a JSON object rather than say a select field or a list of checkboxes, existing checkboxes. So in the back end, what happens is that we send we build a JSON object which is passed to the client, and this is used in order to actually build the drop down. And one of the possibility is to actually customize the way each option label is being displayed within the drop down, which means that the JSON object can actually be much more complex. We can pass not only the values of each checkbox, but we could pass, for example, a thumbnail image. We could pass a series of classes that we want to add, or maybe some data attributes that we want to add to each option. So the hybrid drop down is actually quite a complex allows for quite a complex structure of each individual options in the list, and this therefore allows us, for example, if we take the post source and we select a post, to actually include the thumbnails of that post. Let me just filter these down to say house facilities, just to restrict the number of posts that we're going to see now. And So if I update this, let's see what it gives on the front end. So now this third row here, which has got this image drop down, you can see now that the source of data that has been submitted to the field actually coming from posts, where each post title appears as a caption, and the post thumbnail featured image is used as a little thumbnail to be displayed here in the drop down, making it possible to do such kind of selection in your form. And last but not least, there is also one more option where you can actually build an image grid itself, and this is this last option here. So let me just call this DCB4. And in the image grid with image grid, what happens is that there is no drop down being shown. Again, this requires some more customization as far as each individual option label is concerned, and if you were to say select a source of taxonomy terms, you will now need to actually supply each of the images for every single terms that are included in the drop down, because obviously taxonomies by default don't have any images associated with it, but you might actually maybe have in your configuration some taxonomy meta fields which include images. So this is something you can actually pass through the filter. This is something that I will cover in a subsequent video tutorial, and then you simply copy this filter and go to your functions.php file and simply paste in the filter. And here there's some instructions as to how you need to go about it. Basically, you need to set the option attribute, and here what you have, you would be setting something like attributes data thumbnail. This is the attribute that is required for the image, and then you would be fetching your URL image for every single term that is being included. So at the time of building the field in the front end, all the terms that are found in the database that match your selection of the source would be passed to this filter, and for each one of them you need to actually provide an image. So that would be the way to actually go about filtering those images into the drop down field. So for the time being, for this, so I will be covering this in a subsequent tutorial. For now, I'm just going to demonstrate this image grid with the post thumbnails. So I'm going to select post, and here I'm going to also select, let me see, what shall we have? Impressionists. These are painters, a selection of painters. So let's insert this into the form. Let's update this. And now by default we have this fourth field which is being displayed as a single column. So we've selected an image grid with no drop down. So by default the plugin just displays all the option list in an image grid, and by default that grid is a single column. So we need to actually adjust this to according to the number of columns we want to have in our image grid. So here what we're going to do is we're going to have let's say we're going to place this as a 4-column, and to do this the dynamic checkbox hybrid HTML option of image grid has the ability to define what is called a grid columns option. Grid columns, where is the grid columns? Here we are, the grid columns, and this is what we're going to use. And the hybrid on HTML dropdown has the ability to set its options as data attributes directly on the elements we want to convert. So here in the example there is an image grid down in the last example, and we can actually convert it into a into an n number column, and this is done by actually using the data attribute data grid columns and set that to 4. So this is what we're going to use, and in this case we can pass an attribute directly into our tag over here by putting into quotes set to 4 is the value, and this will now convert our image grid into a 4 column. So this is handled by the plugin for us. So let's see what this looks like. And there we go, and we have our four grid column, and in fact we could probably add an extra 2 columns on either side. By default the layout is centered, the grid is centered within the cell that we have provided for this grid. In this case we've selected a cell which is an entire row width, and that's the reason it's centered in our form. Let's see if we convert this to a 6 column grid. Yeah, and that looks a little bit better because it's more compact, and our 3 rows and 6 columns. So there we are. We can actually build this kind of grid images with our thumbnails, and once they're selected we have a little checkbox being displayed, a round checkbox in the corner of the image. This is also customizable with some CSS. So this concludes this tutorial on the dynamic checkbox. I hope you enjoy this, and in a future video I will be continuing to explore how the hybrid HTML functionality can further be leveraged to give pretty powerful fields in your form. Thank you for that.